Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. Her name is Christina Choi Martin, and she published a book on August 25th, 2021. Title of the book is From Gimje to Red Oak, A Woman's Journey Through Changing Times. Fascinating book. I learned a lot through the book. I wasn't familiar with some of the older Korean traditions and some of the history that happened in Korea earlier on in the 20th century. But she can talk more about that. So, Christina Choi Martin, are you there?
Right.
You're
Hello. Yes. Uh, Actually, Gimje is where my parents were born and raised, and I grew up most of my childhood there. And then Red Oak is where my husband grew up. So that's
Gotcha.
how the title came along. Okay. So this is a book that I promised my children. They wanted to know where I came from, where their roots were from. So I, after I retire, I sort of start taking notes here and there, and sort of, and actually wrote in Korean.
Korean originally, right?
Yeah, they originally, wrote in Korean because there was this lady instructor in Korean Community Center who was instructing how to write a healing uh, autobiography. She said healing because she was a counselor, family counselor. Anyway, so I thought, and she's a poet, and she is actually a minister too after she retired from her regular job. So I thought that was a good place to start. And I had gone to her classes, and then she gave homework to write about this and write about that. Every week I had to do that for 8 months. And then we put them all together and made a book, a Korean version. Of course, none of my children could read it. So then when the shutdown came in 2020, I started to translate and subtract some part and add some more cultural aspect of it so that my children and the American readers can understand what I'm talking about. So that's is how my book came about.
Okay. And it goes back really to your earliest childhood, and definitely
Right,
some cultural differences. Can you talk about your earliest memories and what you imparted? And this is really kind of your memoir.
right.
Can you talk about kind of the earliest memories you have of your family?
Actually, the memories, I mean, in the book, it goes back where I started, when I was born, but uh, my earliest memory is when I went to my maternal grandparents' house. Probably I was around three, maybe younger than three, and there's a cousin living next door who was younger than me, and she and I sort of grew up together in, everywhere in the yard, in the garden, and then she always showed up with her treats that her father brought previous. This cousin had no mother. Her mother passed away.
And that's Hasia. Hasia.
Yes, that's oh, you're good.
I took my note. I took notes.
Oh, I see. Okay, she was my had been my best buddy all through my life actually. And
And what
after
was
she,
the time like in Korea at that time where you had Hasia and you?
uh, it was really quite different from these days. As it was still continuation of the old traditional farming um, country countryside. Okay, and where we are from, and it's sort of like there were the landowners, landlords are usually very learned in Chinese classics, and that sort of came down traditionally from their ancestors, because their ancestors got their land from the government by passing very hard examination of Chinese classics. And so that's how they got their land, and that's the money and power there. And then, then there's the whole class of people who just, working class, who work the land. And I think they were pretty, depend on the, the land or the type of personality or character of the landowners. But as far as I remember, where I grew up, and it was very peaceful coexistence. They came work for, this big landowner, and then they were being taken care of in return. And so that was that way there. And then when I got to Seoul, the capital city, everything was so different. I remember the first memory of me, I think it is when the Republic of Korea was founded. We went to see this huge parade. I guess I wasn't quite aware of what went on, but it was, parade and soldiers and all kinds of fun things like clowns and I think that was the celebration of foundation of Republic of Korea. I would be about 5 years old.
That's
And
1945, right after the liberation, after the Japanese, right?
that's 1948, I guess. The
Okay.
foundation itself, 1945 is when we got liberated from Japan. I think that's the end of World War II, right?
Correct.
All the war ended in 1945, and then we had this period of American military. I don't know what you call it. Government.
Kind of like,
Yeah, they were there to. Then in the south and the north was occupied by the Russian soldiers, and sort of divided immediately after the war into north and south. And so we were with the American government or the government delegates or the soldiers who made it sure that the Japanese got out and the North Korea don't invade, or waiting for the southern people in the south to make their own government, and that they had some turmoil, political turmoil, but in 1948, Seungman Rhee was the first president elected, and that was the founding president. So that was the celebration I remember.
right. So you were kind of growing up in kind of a poor environment too, like your family. I think you said that only 3 of the children out of 7, which is very survived to maturity. Right. Like that's very unusual for this.
That's very. I guess that was rather common because that was during the Japanese occupation. Uh, I was born about 2 years before the liberation, so the children who died. Well, I have my younger sister died in my presence, but the older ones died during the Japanese occupation, and remote country village where you have to walk an hour to doctor's office, or the doctors want that plenty there around. The mainly Chinese medicine, I guess. So my grandfather used to keep a chest whole bunch of little herbs, little drawers with Chinese herbs to concoct medicine for people who were sick. He was not commercially medicine man or anything, but he just studied that. So I remember that. So I guess any ailment happened in the house, I guess he did that. He tried to concoct something to make them feel better. But these little infants, my siblings who died, they're mostly during their infancy, and they just didn't know how to handle it. And I mean, they couldn't run to a pediatrician at those days. So I think that's what happened. I know I sometimes, trying to figure out imagine how my mother must have felt after this, losing each child. So But that was
Yeah, I
very
mean,
common.
and so your parents were in arranged marriage too, so that was something that might have been expected for you, correct?
Yeah, well, because I was very skinny and small and very, not very healthy looking. So, but hey, after all, I was another girl. I don't think they really thought that, but
I mean, and it's
I'm the
kind
one
of
who
like
survived.
right, there was like a bias towards male children too at that time, right?
Oh yes, yes, yes. See, my older brother, it was the first male child born to the whole clan there. I mean, although he was not the son of the first son. You know, grandfather's first son is the one who sort of would be the future patriarch of the clan. But my brother was just only the son of second son, but nevertheless he was very welcome. But then he got ill, had an accident, and he got ill, and so everybody was so distraught. And my mother was having another child. They were all expecting a girl. I mean, a boy, and they came up. Yeah,
So you
so they
eventually, so
chose
you
very yes,
you you were in Gimje, and eventually your family moved to Seoul, correct?
correct.
And so your family was
When I
in.
went,
Yeah,
yeah, well, I we stayed. Well, my father sort of went up to Seoul first, and then came for me later when I became school age. So I moved up to Seoul with my father, to my father. Okay, and
gotcha.
then studied my school. Yes, I
And
had
so
one
you,
year
yeah.
of good school. Yes, yeah, I started my school the year before the Korean War started. See, I was second grade when the Korean War broke out.
And what happened then?
Then we just moved. I mean, we had to, with a lot of people, you know, sort of we followed their suit, and just when we walked, and I don't remember how many nights that was because I don't think I was thinking about that, or nobody else thought about how many nights. But we walked all the way from Seoul to Gimje. I know there's several nights we spent on the road, in some empty house or somebody's small house, small room, and on the way, and on the road to Kimje we got bombed. Well, not direct, maybe one aimed at us, but indirectly, you know, in the bombing site, and saw the bombed towns as we passed through, and things like that happened. Yeah, and then we finally got to Kimje, and then there's my father's side, and then there's my mother's side. My, you know, they had other relatives all came back to the country home because being in any city was very dangerous. They got bombed a lot, all these big cities or towns. So everybody went to this country homestead. Anyway, and we went over to my maternal grandparents' house, and I lived there for several years, I guess, until we came back up again to Seoul.
And there, so at that time there was lots of tension between communist, socialist ideas and capitalism, correct?
Oh yes, oh yes, yes.
Can can you talk about that?
Actually, well, I remember during the occupation of northern soldiers in this country down in Kimje in the southern province, you couldn't go anywhere. I guess it was same everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without their permit to go anywhere. And then I remember when I think during the summer months, uh, some young, well, I guess they were younger than my grandparents, but they came around. They were the committee members of the People's Republic, I guess, and they came around and counted how many sesame seed, sesame pod or peas in a pod, and I think they were trying to estimate what the crops would like, so that they could tax them or whatever they call it. So we watched that, and then of course there was I don't want to tell all of it, but my father was before the liberation, before the Japanese occupation was over. He was in a movement trying to gain independence, and that they were sort of linked to socialists movement also. So he was uh, he was jailed in Jeonju. That's the capital of the province, and well, he got out, somehow he got out, well, because he really didn't actively being a socialist. He got jailed after the liberation was over, and after I guess I think it was during the American of the U.S. What do you call it? They had a temporary government. They told all the South Koreans that you can't have any activity relating to socialism or communism in the South. Okay, and then
Right.
that's how. Well, he wasn't really having any visible activities, but he was just part of the independence movement. But he got jailed that way. But then he had a good reference and got out.
Got out. And
And
you kind of at that
yeah,
time, kind of as during the Korean War and even after, you started kind of being exposed through academics to kind
oh
of
yeah.
Western ideas, Jesuits, things. Can you talk about your academic career in Korea?
Uh, yes, so after we got up to Seoul, uh, that's I guess in 1954 or 5, around that time I started my middle school, and I got in very prestigious middle school, um, and I didn't realize how prestigious that was until I got in, because I saw a lot of daughters of renowned people, socially, economically, politically very renowned people, uh, sent their daughters there. And then we were educated. We had very good. I'm sorry if
It's
somebody's
okay.
calling. We have so many calls these days. Can
And you
I'm
were kind of
sorry.
unusual. Like women at that time, women weren't as commonly educated. Would you agree with that?
Yes, at, in those days, I say the teachers were the best treated women working. Okay, women teachers, they could continue to teach after they got married, but unless you are maybe which is rare, you are the owner of some business or something, which is not very common at that time. But generally, people with my educational background, if you get into a company, after you get married, they expect you to quit. They don't want married women working for them. I think it's the social structure was that way. As I said, I think in my forward, I said, when I worked for a pharmaceutical company as a foreign purchase clerk, I think, I had to go get cigarette from the concession and bring them coffee, and then on top of all my other duties, work. But I really didn't think twice about it at that time. because
It
it's
was
sort
all
of
that was very traditional at that time, though, right?
right. Women serve men that way. So so that's how.
And Korea
That's
kind of
sort of
had
that's
Korea kind of had
yes.
that tradition of like a courtesan females and almost like a geisha or something like that. You're
Oh,
right about
that
that.
is different. Different story. I mean, that's a different class of people, I guess. But uh, generally, that was yeah, that was sort of not. It's just unimaginable in this day and age
Yeah,
what
right.
we had. But then that's history. That's the that's a tradition of historical social background.
Right.
So everybody was on the same level that way, whoever you
And so
are.
you, right? So kind of you were different. Your mom was very much in that kind of traditional economy because she made those hanbok dresses for the women, right? The kind of specialized
Right.
Korean dress. Yeah.
Yes, yes, that was actually prob probably, I was sort of ashamed of my mother's profession because they look down on people who does, that kind of work. Even though traditionally poor scholars' wives made this, made dress for other people. That was the only respectable, uh, safe, secure work that women could do. If your husband is incapable of support you, so the wives, the poor scholar's wife, I know that those stories, but nevertheless, making, she works really hard to do that. Not sleeping much, but I I really didn't tell anybody that my mother was making hanbok for gisengs. So uh, that was the society I lived in. So
Right. So you
I
were
mean,
kind of from, right. You weren't from some of the when you were at school. You may not have been from that same higher class,
right,
upper
right,
class of society, maybe. But you did. I mean, it
right.
sounds like you bounced around. Like you went to Catholic school, Bible school, Methodist church. So you were exposed. Or did you think that
Yes,
exposure was
yes.
unique for that time?
No, it wasn't really. There were a lot of Protestant churches around. I wasn't exposed to Catholic church until I was in high school, but until that time, even in the country, when I went to my grandmother's house during winter vacation at early age, we used to go walk in cold weather, walk to church in some Methodist church or somewhere, and because they have this Christmas pageants, they call it show. So they all, the village kids who never go to church went for the show. Anyway, so that kind of experience I had. And then, of course, I did go to Bible school when I was in Seoul with friend. And then, and at that time, I think my family really is basically either Buddhists or uh, Confucian. I don't know. I guess Confucius is not really a religion, but then
It's like a
we
philosophy.
have
It's like they're a philosopher, right?
right.
Confucianism.
But then all the ancestral memorial service or anything that all followed Confucianism, I think. And I don't know. They anything went at that time. This
So
genre,
things were really
depending on
you
where. Yeah.
did you sense
I
that
mean,
things were really changing there? Things were changing at that time of your life in Korea.
oh yes, oh yes. I mean, I think I say somewhere in my book that my mother and I were born in different generation, different age. We just didn't have much in common in culture. because it's such a changing. And of course, my mother stayed home and made dress and didn't have any chance to see the changing world very much. But then I was at school learning Western culture, Western language, and I mean, it's just so different, you know. It was changing so fast. Yes.
It really is remarkable. Like just one generation, just incredible changes. Like when I see your stories of your family, it's like you're going back in time, like seeing a Korean family that could have lived in the 19th century. It just seemed those sensibilities,
Right,
arranged
right.
marriages.
Yes. Yeah.
And so what, I mean,
Of course,
what,
there are,
go ahead.
yes.
No, please
Oh,
continue.
no, there are still arranged marriages these days. I know, like if you are from big money, you sort of, I don't know, I guess maybe that's in Korean dramas, but you merge families, wealth, right, through arranged marriage. But that still goes on. But most cases these days, you find your own spouse, I think. And there are a lot of Korean unmarried aging people. Let's put it that way.
Interesting.
And also some people find it more convenient to live alone. I don't want to go in there.
Right. But I mean, it was like in your book, you talk about the women when they're married, they're expected to go live with their in-laws. Like they're gone. It's not like some other, like maybe today
That
you
was
go in and
that way.
get an apartment or house.
That was that way. Maybe up to
And
19
then you,
uh,
sorry, please.
60s or 1950s. It was that way. You know, it's like you once married that family, you're their ghost when you die. So that kind of situation they were on. But that's more in the country, you know, this rural society than in Seoul, I guess.
Right.
So in the
And
big cities, a little different. They change faster. Yeah.
and so you kind of came up like you seem to have a connection to the American professors. At some point, you wanted to leave Korea for your education. Is that correct?
That's true. Yes.
Can you explain kind of how that background and how that came about?
You know, I was I graduated from college and was working in a pharmaceutical, and I said I'm not going anywhere. Um, and of course, when you reach certain age, all your extended family wants to work. Want to um, match me up with somebody before I get too old. The older I get, the more difficult it will be for me to get married. They were worried, and I was in that situation, so I don't need that. And also, I was pretty close to one of the Jesuit fathers who was running the university, and he's, I guess, arranged me to get a full tuition scholarship in I think in Minnesota, and that's how I came.
Right.
Then
How old
then I
were you
moved.
when you right? How old were you when you flew to the U.S.?
That was 1967, so I was 24, I guess. Yeah,
And
24.
what was it like coming from Korea to the United States?
Oh, that was very scary, but then I was full of anticipation and, expectation, and and I, people say you are so brave to do that at that age. It's not like my family had plenty of money and going to support me or anything, but I just did that. I guess it took a lot of courage to do that, but then that was sort of, courage is sort of like a luxury for me. I had to do what I have to do for my life. With all of, let's say, things going on, my family life and, our hardship and economic status and all that. I never thought about my future won't be like that. I'll have a better tomorrow. I always had that conviction in my heart, and I never really swayed from that. And says I need to get out of this and go there and see what I can do with my life. That's how I felt when I came. And
And so, what were your impressions, or how did you adapt to this totally foreign country or culture?
uh, I thought everything. Well, back then people didn't even lock their house. When I first came, it was very quiet and very peaceful, and of course, that was something I sort of had difficulty adapting to. I was in St. Paul, Minnesota, and when I look outside, there's nobody on the street. It made me feel so isolated, and because I lived in big city, Seoul, and but then the lifestyle and everything. I said, gosh, women have it so good in this country. That's how I felt. I think I told my host family that actually, God, I feel so bad for my mother, all the hardships she had to go through, looking at how good you have. That's what I told. I don't know, maybe some ladies won't like what I say, but that's how what I said to the host lady. um, the I mean, living condition and economic freedom, not to worry about what your next meal will come from, or you have so much right. I thought, women have so much right in this country. That was 1967, 70, or 8,
Right.
and looking at I thought it was such a free country, free, and it's very easy for women to live.
And you were kind of unusual in Korea for a woman at that time, getting a didn't you get a bachelor's and then a master's? Is that right?
Uh, I had bachelor's degree in Korea, and then I had master's in this country.
Gotcha.
That well, yeah. When after I got in to this country,
Gotcha. And you got a master's here, and then I mean, you met you kind of people wanted to arrange you with, or were you expected to marry another person from Korea?
well, in Korea, I really didn't want to get married back then. Yeah, I said I think I said I'm still 23 or 24. I have time. I don't need to rush into any marriage. That's
Right.
how I felt. Yeah, and I didn't like the arrangement they make for me either. So I said, I'm gonna wait until I meet somebody who love me for what I am, not because where I'm from and what my family background is and all that, because that's what they first ask when they're trying to match up somebody. What does your father do? What kind of life you have, and where did you go to school to, and all these questions. I mean, I guess those things are important for people who's making arrangement, but to match up sort of compatible people together. But I said I don't need that, and then I got here, and then I have a cousin who came to, I went to UNC to get my master's, but then another cousin came to UNC because he knew I was there, and but I wasn't there. We lived in Puerto Rico when he came, and he said when he first got there, he said I had some nerve or some gut to be able to come all the way here all by myself, sort of empty-handed, and landed in UNC. So he told me that. So I guess, but I you know I never let my spirit down all through this, and I became Catholic when I was in high school, And I always had, even if I sort of lax going to church every Sunday because of certain circumstances, I never left in my heart from the church. So I guess that gave me strength to always look for better tomorrow, and it'll be all right tomorrow. You know, if I have some problem today, it'll get better tomorrow. Sort of attitude I had.
Right. Well, you've come a long way. I mean, come all the way from South Korea before the Korean War to the present. There's a lot more in this book. We're about 35 minutes. What else would you like to wrap up with before we end the interview?
Well, that in what area would you like to?
Well, I'm just saying, like, where's the best place for people to get From Gimje to Red Oak?
Oh,
The book.
well, I guess you can go into Amazon. I actually self-published this, so um, it's in Amazon. You can get either a Kindle version or this book. It's very easy to get it.
And do you have a website or social media if people want to reach out and talk to you?
No, I don't. I guess I don't know if it's my generation. You know, I am close to 80s. I'm not 80 yet, but I guess the people at my age have a lot of connections through websites, but website or social media or everything, I don't have any of those.
Don't have that.
I think I'm busy enough for what I have
Right.
now.
You don't
I
need
feel
any
that.
more of that. Well, there's a lot more to the story. You get married, you go to Puerto Rico, you're in San Juan, come back to DC, children, grandchildren. So you're probably pretty busy. But a really fascinating book. And thanks so much for sharing your autobiography with me. Again, the title of the book is From Gimje to Red Oak, A Woman's Journey Through Changing Times by Christina Choi Martin. And it just got published August 25th, 2021. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me here.
All right, take care. Have a good one. All right, stay there. Don't go anywhere.